Okay. Hi, guys. Good afternoon. And today we're going to be talking about machine learning. Um, I guess I'll just start off with a deck that gives a little bit of background and theory. And this is intended for audiences that are not really, um, I wouldn't say have heard of, but are not really familiar with machine learning and what are the basic concepts. And uh, essentially a 101 course, right? For those who are familiar, it might also be a good refresher. um, and then once we are through with some of the basic concepts, we will also try and look at some of the real world code that we write and some examples of each of the machine learning techniques that we're going to talk about. Okay, so what is machine learning? In a very basic sense, machine learning is software that automatically understands data, learns from it, and essentially derives inferences from it automatically without human intervention or any explicit programming for the kind of inferences that we want to derive. It falls under this entire umbrella called artificial intelligence, and artificial intelligence is designed to it's a way in which we are trying to write software or computer programs that will mimic human behavior and the human decision making process, right? So machine learning falls under this umbrella, and as this subset, it uses algorithms, it uses mathematics and statistics uh, that enable machines to learn and improve with experience. And what is experience? Experience is nothing but observations that our data has. So each observation is an experience for a machine learning algorithm, and with a higher number of observations, therefore a higher number of experiences, more and more can the algorithm learn from the data and refine its inferences. And this takes us down to another subset of machine learning, which is deep learning, which essentially is powering a lot of the general AI use cases in the world. And it's a subset of ML that takes, that makes really the computation of very complex multi-layered neural networks feasible, right? Uh, this is the first and the only time I'm going to be talking about neural networks in this entire presentation. Um, just to and reinforce the fact that deep learning or neural networks are not the only thing as part of the machine learning world, but in fact, just a small part of it. Having said that, the complexities of challenges that deep learning can solve are definitely much higher than what a lot of other techniques can, right? So again, looking at machine learning from another point of view, right? It is an amalgamation of science, art, and math. And the science part of it is essentially using data to arrive at inferences that are not heuristically obvious. That is, as a human, you cannot always observe that, nor humanly computable. That is, some of the math that goes into it, you cannot humanly compute without either spending a lot of time or being, let's say, somebody who's at a level of a PhD, right? The art part of machine learning is balancing, the generalization of inferences from data against multiple individual and specific observations in the data. Now what this means is that any machine learning algorithm is designed to do one of two things. It is designed to either predict something, or it is designed to group something, and we'll talk about this more. But whenever it is doing so, uh, there are different kinds of biases, there are different kinds of generalizations that a machine learning algorithm will do. And each of the observations that we see will deviate from this generalization to an extent. And the art part of machine learning is knowing how to balance how generic do we want the model to be vis-a-vis individual observations that are very specific and for a given x and y, or a given input and output, have a very defined value, right? Finally, the mathematics part of machine learning. uh, Mathematics is in the sense that machine learning's cornerstone lies in representation of data, and the representation of data in different models, in the different techniques that are used, are essentially what power the inferences that can be drawn from them, or what kind of statistical or algorithmic techniques we can use in order to derive said inferences. um, all right, so how do we actually do machine learning? uh, we are all familiar with a lot of processes, but the core process of machine learning really is very simple. One is to gather your data. Now, gathering data is often a multi-step process. There will be multiple data sources. There might be some ETL that you'll have to do to bring your data in. There might be some sort of data merges or data homogenization that needs to be done. Uh, so essentially, getting all of your data in from multiple sources into one location is often the number one step towards delivering a machine learning output. The second step is cleaning your data to have homogeneity. uh, but this also involves a lot of other things. For example, uh, first thing is to profile your data and do an EDA, or exploratory data analysis. Now, when exploring the data, there are often a lot of things that we find for every column of data there.
Joining from their own Zoom.
Hello.
Sorry.
Yeah. Right. Um, so cleaning of data, right? Often there are lots of things that we observe while just looking at the data and doing exploratory analysis. That is, finding out what the distributions of data are. Are there any null values in it or not? Are there any outliers or not? Univariate analysis, bivariate analysis, etc. And if you've listened in on the previous talks in this series, I'm sure you would have come across some of those. So really, the second step is not just get merging the data together to create homogeneous sets, but also understanding the data, understanding what the data is trying to say to us, or what are the kind of information that the data is hiding, right? Based on this, what we do as step three is, number one, select the right kind of machine learning algorithm. Now, there are multiple things that go into selecting an algorithm, right? From understanding what the data looks like, what are the distributions, and what are the key observations from the univariate, bivariate analysis, the exploratory analysis, etc. Then also what the end goal is. Are we trying to predict something? Are we trying to measure something? Are we trying to simplify the data? Are we trying to group the data, etc.? So what is it that we are really trying to do? That will also have a key factor in selecting what kind of a model we want to choose. After that, of course, we want to gain insights from the model's results. So once the model has given results, we'll try to verify the results. We'll try to test the models. We'll try to gain inference in terms of aggregate results from the outputs, etc. And while doing so, we'll also want to visualize it so that it's easier to understand. Now, step three to step five, what happens is that a lot of times a particular model might not work, or a particular set of parameters for a model might not work. And we will end up having to repeat the process with either a different model, or the same model but with different parameters, or even the same parameters but with different number of iterations, etc. So this is really a loop over here, but in its most simplest form, it is getting all of your data, merging it, homogenizing it, selecting the model, and building the model out, gaining insights from the model output, and translating them. And yeah, one thing which is very important is that insights gained from a model's result need to always be translated into uh, a manner which is consumable by whosoever needs to consume the output. For example, in a given business, if for example we are trying to do demand forecasting, right? Demand forecasting essentially, for example, in the retail sector, deals with trying to predict what the demand for each and every product is going to be, let's say over the next quarter, over the next 6 months, or the next year, depending on what the production cycle is. Now, the demand forecasting algorithms, uh, they will give their results in some sort of a form or manner. However, the business needs to consume it in a much different way. What they need to understand is for that they need to go and essentially select a product, select a time frame, then get predictions for that particular time frame, but also be able to change key input metrics. For example, one of the predictors in demand forecasting could potentially be market forces, right? Who is running what kind of advertisements and what budget, and what is the company running, what kind of budgets are they running, um, in terms of marketing spend. So if the executive says that, hey, my if I reduce my marketing spend by 50%, my demand can also reduce by X percentage. And that is something that, in a very interactive manner, can be consumed by the business. So this was just an example, but really the key to the key thing to think about here is that whenever we are working with data and trying to give insights from data, it's always important to remember that who is the one who is consuming this information, and what are the questions that they will have in their mind, and through the output that we as data guys provide, um, how can we answer them in a real time and automated manner, right? So, what are the different kinds of models? And I'm sure some of you would have seen this chart multiple times before, but this is one of my favorite representations of the machine learning ecosystem. The reason is that it makes it really, really simple to understand what are the major things that we need to look at when we are looking at machine learning, right? So, let's say we want to do something with data, and we see what is our, how much data do we have. Now, of course, this chart says 50 samples, but it can vary in different use cases. But let's say we see that we have a very small amount of data, then what we really want to do is, go and get more data, identify the means of getting more data, or identify the means of generating more data, right? But if we feel that, hey, we have enough data, then the question is, what are we trying to do? Are we trying to predict a category, or are we trying to predict a quantity, right? If we are trying to predict a category and we have labeled data, then essentially we are trying to classify all our observations, all the new observations that are not labeled, into the set of labels that we already have. And if we do not have labeled data, then we are trying to essentially group all the observations that we have into groups that inherently have similar or similarities in them. So this brings us to the left hand side of the chart, where classification and clustering are done on, you know, when we are trying to essentially group the data, but classification is done when we already have a set of labels and we have a small set of data that is already labeled that we can learn from. If we do not have the set of data that we can learn from, if we do not have labels in some of the data, in some part of the data set, then essentially we are giving a free hand to the algorithm to determine what kind of groups there are in the data, and we are in the domain of clustering. On the right hand side, when we are trying to say predict a quantity, right, that is uh, for example, in demand forecasting, we are trying to predict what will be the quantum of demand. In sales forecasting, we are trying to predict what will be the quantum of sales. In any other, a lot of other use cases, for example, stock market predictions, we are trying to predict what will be the price of stocks, which is the quantum of price. So if you're trying to predict a quantity, then we essentially go into the regression domain, where regression essentially helps us to say that, hey, given a range of observations that we have, I can try and predict from the given data that based on a set of input parameters, what will be the quantum of a given predicate that we are trying to do. And a predicate is nothing but a variable that we are trying to predict. And finally, if you're just looking at the data, we just want to uh, see what the data looks like. We want to see the structure of the data, and we want to see, identify what are the key things about the data. That is the, simplification of the data. We are in the domain of dimensionality reduction, where we've got a lot of techniques like PCA, isomap, spectral embedding, topographical data analysis, etc., that help us not only simplify complex data sets, but also visualize them in a 2D or 3D manner, so that it becomes easy for a human to consume that information and understand what the structure, or essentially the inherent structures of the data are. So, thinking about the kinds of models in another manner, if you see that we've cut this horizontally in the top half and the bottom half, where the top half, uh, there is a data set or a part of the data set that already has tags or labels or some values or observed values of the target variable or the variable that we are trying to predict. For example, in sales forecasting, we have historical data where for the given set of observations, what were the sales, we have that information. For demand forecasting, again, we have historical data with all the set of observations, along with what the estimated demand at that point in time was. So we already have all of that information, and we just want to learn from this information, from these real world observations. So because we are learning from these real world observations, you can say that these real world observations are actually supervising the algorithm, and this set of algorithms are called supervised algorithms. Now, if we have a bunch of observations that are not labeled, or we do not have any inference about these, it's just, we just have a bunch of columns that we know nothing about, then what we are basically trying to do is either trying to extract information from them in terms of which rows of data are similar to each other, which is clustering, or how does the entire data set look like in terms of its inherent structure. What are the similarities between columns and what are the relationships between columns? So that is dimensionality reduction. So if you've noticed, the bottom half where there is no supervision of training set is called unsupervised algorithms. And within unsupervised algorithms, on the left hand side of the screen, where we are trying to essentially look at the different kinds of rows and understand the relationship of the different rows with themselves, or the different observations with themselves, then we are in the domain of clustering. If we are trying to observe the relationship of each of the different columns of data or dimensions of data with each other, then we are in the domain of dimension reduction. I'll take a pause at this point and open the floor up to any questions, if there are any. No? All right. Okay. So let's start with a very basic overview of the first algorithm we want to talk about, and that is regression. So, what is regression? It is essentially fitting a mathematical function onto samples of data that are observed so that we can use that function to predict the value or the output value for any observation in the uh, for essentially any set of observation in the input variable. Now, let's say you've got observations in the form of x and y, right? And we say that we are trying to, we have our input variable as x and we are trying to predict y. And we have some rows where we already have y. And they can have a relationship on the left hand side of the screen. You'll see they can have a linear relationship where, x and y can be fit with a straight line. The straight line can be positively sloped, negatively sloped, horizontal, vertical, whatever, but essentially they have a linear relationship. It is also possible that they have a non-linear relationship. It could be a polynomial relationship. For example, if my output variable is defined by a quadratic equation on x, something similar to ax square plus bx plus c, right? So that will give me a quadratic equation and the graph will be like a quadratic graph. And I'm hoping everybody had taken high school math so that they remember what a quadratic graph looks like. Anybody who here did not take high school math? Okay, I don't hear a no. All right. So it could not only quadratic, but it could go into multiple degrees of complexity, and they all fit under the regression functions. How are regression functions evaluated? So if you see, when we try and fit a line, that line will not touch each and every point. In fact, it will touch only a few points. Each point or each observation in this case deviates from the line to an extent. And what this deviation tells us is what is the error of prediction. Now, how do we optimize our prediction? What we try to do is, for the given set of observations, we are going to try and minimize the total error in the system. What that means is we take all the individual errors and we try and minimize those so that uh, the line is essentially the best fit for all the points that are there in the system. And if we change it, then essentially the within the system what the total error is will increase. So if that is the case, we say that we've got a good fit, right? Some of the popular techniques and what you've seen over here is linear regression. There is also there are other regression techniques. There are some different kinds of linear regressions available, etc. But in regression, linear regression and SVM regression are the two very popular concepts. And we'll talk about linear regression in a bit again. SVM regression, if you want, we can either have, sessions again, or, there is a lot of material available that we can study. So while doing regression, how do we check whether the fit that we've got is a good fit or not? Now, there is a, a regression line or a regression curve can be a good fit for the data, but it can also be underfitted and overfitted. On the left hand side of your screen, you will see the blue line, which is our trained model. And in this case, we have trained a linear model on this data. You will see that most of the data samples are quite far away from from the model, and there is a high amount of error in the system, right? And what this causes, and this is a degree 1, which basically means that it's a linear fit that we've done, right? So what this basically tells us that this is a grossly under fitted model where the amount of error is very high. and therefore, you know, if we try to if we try to basically predict something using this model, we will most likely end up with a prediction that is way off the actual value. On the right hand side of your screens, you will see that the model is a very complex model with the degree of complexity at 15, which means that the model is in the form of a function where a x to the power 15 plus b x to the power 14 plus c x to the power 13, so on and so forth, to n x to the power 1 and plus a constant c, right? So a model like this is a very complex model, and it touches almost every data point that is there, and is a grossly overfit model. And what this does is, even though in this chart you might see that uh, the predictions will be fairly close uh, to the actual value, but what happens if there are outlier values? For example, there is one point here where the true function and the model actually deviate. And if you're trying to predict there, we'll start seeing errors over there. And especially when data is a little dirty and spread all over, what happens is that uh, an overfitted model starts looking like your heart waves or your sinusoidal curves that that your ECG machine gives out. And when that happens, you can be rest assured that for a very small change in X, there can be a very large change in Y, and that will lead to grossly that will lead to results again that are way off. And in this case, the model you see in the center is essentially a well-fit model at degree 4 that follows, that essentially fits quite a few uh, of the observations. However, uh, we are not assuming that a model has to fit each and every observation. When we try and predict using this, we will still have a very high degree of prediction or prediction accuracy. uh, and the trick is, that whenever we are trying to build a model, especially a regression model, the trick is to get the complexity just right, so that we are not either overfitting or underfitting the model. Now, what are biases and variances in a model? When we have a supervised machine learning algorithm like a regression algorithm, it learns from training data, right? The goal of any such algorithm is to take the best estimate of the mapping function. Uh, Mapping function is essentially the function or the mathematical equation that defines what the output variable will be given an input variable x or a set of input variables x1, x2, x3, so on and so forth, right? It is called a target function under most circumstances, and the goal of this machine learning algorithm is to approximate or determine the best fit function that will describe this data. Now, there are different kinds of issues that we can face with regression. The first thing that we can face is bias. Now, bias means that we are overtly simplifying a model to make the target function easier to learn. In this case, if you look at the left hand side where you've got a grossly underfit model, this is this contains high bias, which means that uh, it's a very oversimplified model that that describes the data somewhat, but essentially the only thing is that it is fairly easy to learn. The math behind it is simple. On the right hand side of your current screen, there is variance error. And what is variance error? If we change the training data that was used, how will the model change, right? In the in this case, if you look at the left hand side, if you change the training data into another sample taken from this data set, the model will not change too much, because it's again very underfit. So the amount of error that is there in the model anyways is high. On the right hand side, however, where there is degree 15, you'll see that the model follows each and every data point very closely. So if those data points change, the model definition and the model function will also change drastically. That is called a variance error. Now, what happens between overfitting and underfitting is that we have to take care of this bias variance trade-off, right? There are models that will have a high bias with a low variance, and there are models that will have a low bias but with a high variance, right? The goal of optimizing machine learning, supervised machine learning, to say, is that your model should have the lowest bias and the lowest variance possible, right? And this is going to help you achieve a good prediction performance, right? The general trend is that linear models or linear machine learning algorithms, they have high bias and they have low variance, and non-linear machine learning algorithms with a very high degree of complexity will have low bias, but they'll have a high variance. And it has been shown in this particular chart. On your left hand side is a linear model, on your right hand side is a high complexity polynomial model. The right hand side has a lot of variance error in it, and the left hand side model has a very high bias. Right? Can I take any questions on regression at this point? Okay. All right, so we move on to classification. Now, what is classification? Classification is essentially a technique where we are trying to group the data into labels or sets that have been defined in a training data set already, which means that we have our observations, and for each of those observations, we also have a tag or a set that it belongs to that we can learn from. And the and classification techniques, what they do mathematically is that they fit a function to form a boundary between individual groups that so that every new observation can be charted onto that graph, can be identified to fall either one side or the other side of the boundary, and therefore their class is inferred from there. If you look at the left hand side of your screen, this is an example of a support vector machine, which is a very popular classification technique. You'll see that there are circles and there are crosses, and there is a classification hyperplane, which is basically your boundary, and there are two more margins that you will see. So what support vector machine does is that it creates a wide boundary between the two sets. And what can happen is there can be some observations. For example, in this case, the red dot, there is one red dot in the blue cross zone, and that is essentially uh, in the training data set, something which is an outlier, but it also helps us identify what the error is, which means it's got a positive error to the boundary. Similarly, the blue cross that falls between the boundary and the margin has a negative error towards the boundary, which means that although it falls in no man's land between the margin and the boundary, it is still on the right side of the boundary, and therefore is still classified according to the boundary as correct, right? So this is how we essentially create boundaries between two sets of data. But talking of these boundaries again can be underfitted, overfitted, or appropriate. Um, there are lots of classification techniques, random forest, support vector machines, logistic regressions, etc. Now, logistic regression is a classification technique, but it has regression in the name. So please don't get confused. But we will talk about an example with logistic regression that will show you why this is uh, called a classification technique um, more than essentially your regression technique, right? But we have to be careful that even with classification, it is possible to underfit or overfit your classifier or your margins, that will essentially lead to misclassification in your test data sets or your actual, data sets where you want to predict. So how do we check if our predictions are good? There are multiple ways of checking our predictions. Uh, there is the confusion matrix, there is the lift gain chart, there is the ROC or area under curve chart, etc. But at the core of it, all of these verification techniques have the same basic idea, which is a representation of how many of my test observations did I predict right or did I predict wrong. Now, confusion matrix is one of the easiest way of doing it. On your left hand side, each row is your essentially tag of data, which means what was originally tagged. On top, each column represents your um, the algorithm's output. And in this case, if you see, there are 5,440 observations where it was trained on, and out of that, 3,834 uh, predictions were essentially positive predictions where the tag was also positive, and 951 were negative predictions where the tag was also negative, right? This leads us to three different kinds of precision metrics that we have. One is precision of the model, the second is recall of the model, and the third is an overall performance metric. Now, what is precision of a model? The precision of a model basically means that how accurate was the model in predicting the positive class, which means that if you take the first column, um, 3,834 and 16, it predicted all of these 3,850 observations as positive, out of which 3,834 were actually positive, but 16 were erroneously tagged, which means that my model has a precision of 99.6%. The second metric is recall, which basically means that out of all the observations that were positive in my test data set, how many was my model able to recall or remember or predict as positive? Which means that if you look at the first row, 4,473 positive observations were there in the test data set. However, the model was only able to flag 3,834 out of those as positive, which means that the recall of my model is 85%, right? What happens is that when we do a regression, uh, or sorry, when we do a classification, each of the rows has a probability to fall under one or the other classes. And we define a cutoff that essentially tells us, whether or not to classify it into category one or two. Now, what happens is if we try and move this cutoff, it's again a trade off between precision and recall, where a model can be very precise and, predict all, essentially get everything right for one particular class or the positive class in this case. But it does it by predicting everything as positive, which means that it has got very bad recall. It does not remember the negative class at all. Similarly, a model can have a very high recall, which means that it can predict everything as uh, it can predict everything as negative in this case, and it can have a very good recall, but then its precision would be very bad. Now, this becomes important in some business cases or some real world applications. For example, if in the medical field you're trying to predict if somebody has cancer or not, it becomes an interesting thing where, what kind of a model do we want to build? Do we want to build a high precision model, or do we want to build a high recall model? And uh, from experience, what I would say is that when we've done stuff like that, we end up with a high recall model for the simple reason that if somebody comes for a health check and is given a test that through machine learning tries to say whether or not a person will have cancer 5 years down the lane or has cancer already, that uh, that if that patient has cancer, the model must say that the patient has a high likelihood of cancer. If the model says that the patient has a high likelihood of cancer, but the patient does not have cancer, it is still okay, because further tests will prove the model wrong. But if the model says that no cancer, but the patient has cancer, we are threatening somebody's life. So it becomes a very important way to think about how to validate our models, not only from an accuracy perspective, but also from a business or a real world use case perspective. And finally, if you look at the left diagonal, which is the number of 3834 plus 951, that is essentially how many observations overall did it get right. We get something which is called an F score, or your overall accuracy of your model, which is at 88% here. Now, similarly, there are other ways of looking at uh, model evaluation. With one of them is a lift chart or a gain chart that essentially tells, uh, compared to randomly assigning a class, how much better did the model do. And the same thing is essentially done in an ROC chart, where compared to randomly assigning a class to each row, how much better was the model compared to compared to the randomly assigned classes. And this takes in a metric called true positive rate and false positive rate, where a true positive is essentially in the above confusion matrix, your 1 1, that is your first cell out of 4, is your true positive rate. Your false positive rate is your first column and second row, where it essentially predicted true, but it was a false true. It was originally false, right? So this ratio is essentially mapped here, and across this entire range of false positive rate, where did our model lie? And essentially, the higher it is, the more area under the curve, the better your model is performing, right? So this bias and this variance in this model, how do we reduce it? The trick is actually quite simple. We do something called multifold cross validation, which means that if, let's say, I have 1,000 rows in my training data set, what I will do is I will randomly select 900 out of 1,000 rows to build my first model, and build it and essentially get my model parameters. Then I will build another model with another either randomly chosen 900, or specifically chosen 900 to include my previous, uh, you know, my previously excluded training set. So uh, out of 1,000 rows, my training set is always um, 900 strong. Every row gets to be part of 9 out of 10 um, training sets, and becomes the validation set at least once. And this way we are essentially building 10 models, and then we are averaging them out, so that the effect of variance bias is reduced, and we are essentially optimizing where we all the parameters and function, essentially the constants of that function. Can I take any question on classification? Okay. So I see that we have little time with us, so I will very quickly cover clustering. Now, with clustering, we are coming into the space where we do not have any tagged data, or we do not know anything about the data set in terms of what kind of groups lie within them. So we essentially use math to observe their inherent properties and figure out how different they are from each other, or how different is each row from each other, and with these differences essentially group them together into different clusters, right? On the left hand side is one of the popular ways of clustering, which is hierarchical clustering. And this hierarchical clustering essentially can work on a lot of different ways. But uh, the easiest way to think about it is that, let's say, each row of observation has 5 different dimensions, or 8 different dimensions, each dimension being a column of your data, which is not the primary key. Then which is the dimension that cuts the data the best, right? So we take one dimension, we cut it out and divide it into two. Then we take another dimension and cut that again and divide it further, so on and so forth. And much like a decision tree, uh, we get groups of data that are finally similar. Uh, on the right hand side, what you'll see is a more mathematical way of finding the distance between each individual row that k-means clustering uses. Again, a very popular method of clustering. And what k-means will do is essentially it'll take all of your dimensions and use uh, mathematics of distance functions to essentially find out how different are individual rows from each other, and use that information to group together rows that are very similar to each other. Now, how do we calculate these matrices, or what are these distance matrices? Uh, the two most common distance measures are Euclidean distance and Manhattan distance. And the easiest way to understand that, on the left hand side of your screen, you'll see a grid. Now, this grid refers to potentially, let's say, points in a 6x6 grid, right? Now, my point P1 is at 1 comma 1, and my point P2 is at 5 comma 4, right? If I draw a straight line from P1 to P2, then the length of that line is essentially my Euclidean distance, or the hypotenuse of the right triangle that connects them. This is basically as the crow flies distance, or the uh, or simply put, the shortest distance between the 2 points. The second very popular method is Manhattan distance. And what Manhattan distance is that how much will you have to travel along the axi, or along the different axes you have, in order to reach from point 1 to point 2, which means you'll have to travel 3 points on the x-axis and 4 points on the y-axis. So you'll have to travel a total of 7 points uh, in order to reach from point 1 to point 2. And this is used a lot in the cases of text processing, natural language, etc., where going from one word to another, if you're trying to find links, then essentially we'll be able to find out how many different words join them together. Another very useful case is when we are trying to do network analysis. For example, in social media, I want to understand how far away in my social circle am I from you. And the way in which this data can be represented, we can calculate the Manhattan distance, in which the Manhattan distance is basically a list of all common friends that we have. So we can say that we are 2 degrees of separation, or 3 degrees of separation, or 4 degrees of separation away from each other, right? So that is that. And on your right hand side, you will see a representation where we've got 10 samples, and each sample uh, has essentially a difference or a distance score against each other sample, right? And this is what we call a distance matrix, where you'll see that the ones that are colored light blue are very similar to each other, and as the depth of the color grows, uh, the differences start growing. So we can say that uh, 2 and 1 are very similar to each other or close to each other. Again, 3 and 2 are very close to each other, the distance being small. But 6 and 1 or 7 and 1 are pretty far from each other and potentially will not belong to a single cluster. Right, so that brings me to the end of the presentation that I had. I'll take any questions at this point, uh, if there are any. No? All right. Okay. So what we have, I know we are potentially falling short of time, but we will continue tomorrow. Uh, but over the next session, what we'll essentially cover is an example of linear regression. How do we go about training a linear model? How do we predict? What is logistic regression? How do we go about predicting using logistic regression? Where do we use logistic regression? What is a decision tree? How do we use a decision tree to classify what is a support vector machine, and how do we use a support vector machine? And finally, k-means clustering, and how do we essentially cluster? So we'll go about this in detail tomorrow. uh, we'll also go through, revise some of the concepts that we talked about today in detail. We'll also go through how do we check for overfitting or underfitting, and essentially the code that drove the picture that you saw in the deck. Then how do we look at the different biases and variances, and how can we fit multiple models so that we can check where we are getting the best, essentially the just right fit for the model. And finally, we'll look at how do we do a train test split, and how can we take a data set, split it across train test, etc. How do we do a cross validation, and basically use that to build a model. If we have some time, we will also go through a case study or two with NLP, where we'll talk about using some of the outputs of some deep learning models, k-means clustering, etc., together in order to classify a news data set into different categories or clusters where their context is similar to each other. So I think I will stop here for today, and over to you, Neelam.
Thanks, Ishan. Thanks everyone for attending. We'll see you back tomorrow. We'll send you an invite. So I'm ending it now, okay?
Yeah. Cheers, everybody. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks.